Bom, sejam todos bem-vindos. Sou Cláudio Coy, sou diretor associado da Faculdade de Ciências Médicas. Estou representando aqui nesse momento a professora Eliana Amaral, que é coordenadora do NAPS, sempre dessa mesa, mas ela teve um problema pessoal e ela vai atrasar um pouco. Iniciamos nesse momento o primeiro Seminário Internacional de Pesquisa em Educação para as Profissões de Saúde, evento que também comemora os 10 anos do programa Pró-Ensino em Saúde. É um evento realizado pela diretoria, Núcleo de Avaliação e Pesquisa em Educação e Saúde, e Programa de Pós-Graduação em Clínica Médica da FCM, e que conta com o apoio da Coordenadoria de Apoio Acadêmico. Então, em nome da professora Eliana, eu dou boas-vindas a todos e agradeço a presença de nossos convidados, da programação e do público que nos acompanha através do canal da FCM do YouTube. Eu queria, inicialmente, agradecer muito a professora Eliana pela organização desse evento. É um programa que tem 10 anos, que iniciou a partir de uma necessidade de aprimorar o ensino em saúde. É uma área importantíssima e estratégica aqui para a Faculdade de Ciências Médicas. E houve a criação de um programa de pós-graduação que contou muito com o apoio da clínica médica, do departamento de clínica médica, para que isso ocorresse. A professora Eliana, ela fez uma homenagens aqui às pessoas que se envolveram, que se destacaram na criação desse programa. E a primeira homenageada dessa manhã é a professora Angélica Maria Bicudo, do Departamento de Pediatria. Aqui eu agradeço a presença dela e eu passo a palavra para as suas considerações. Professora Angélica, por favor.
Bom dia a todos. Eu queria dizer o quanto eu estou feliz, com esses 10 anos desse programa, que na verdade é uma área de concentração na clínica médica, que teve início em 2010, quando o edital saiu. E aqui eu tenho que fazer um agradecimento especial à Silvia, que redigiu esse programa com a gente, comigo, com a Eliana, redigido por ela, onde ela procurou os professores para fazerem parte desse programa, e um agradecimento à gestão, que na época era o professor Gontijo, que está aqui, o professor Gil, o professor Zoner, que estava na pós, e que, gentilmente, entendendo o motivo da criação dessa área, nos acolheu no programa de pós-graduação da clínica médica. E depois os outros coordenadores que vieram, Rosana, agora a Cláudia, têm entendido o que essa área representa para nós, professores da Faculdade de Ciências Médicas, onde a pesquisa se fez necessária em educação médica. Não é fácil fazer a pesquisa em educação médica, mas avançamos bastante. A professora Eliana tem um esforço imenso, no sentido de manter esse programa, com muitos alunos de pós, e que se formaram, que estão aí no campo, fazendo o seu papel, e agradecer a todos que se envolveram nesse programa. Muito obrigada pela oportunidade aí de termos essa área de concentração.
Angélica, a faculdade que agradece aí seu empenho, sua dedicação, também a instalação do programa. Eu passo a palavra à segunda homenageada dessa manhã, a professora doutora Rosana Novo Campos, chefe do Departamento de Saúde Coletiva, e que na época estava coordenando o programa de pós-graduação aqui na faculdade. Foi uma das responsáveis também pela implantação do programa. Professora Rosana, por favor.
Oi, bom dia a todos e a todas. Eu queria agradecer muito a Angélica a lembrança, dizer que, na verdade, assim, o programa Gontijo deve lembrar, foi uma linha específica da CAPES. Acho que o Gontijo na época estava na área, na CAPES, quando isso começou, E quando eu estava na coordenação da pós-graduação, foi o momento que o programa e o financiamento CAPES tinha concluído e a gente precisava dar um destino, né, a esse programa. A gente até cogitou, né, Silvia, escrevemos uma proposta para ver se a gente conseguia criar um programa autônomo, vamos dizer assim, de pós-graduação. E, enfim, a conjuntura da avaliação do momento não foi favorável e a gente teve esse acolhimento, essa compreensão do programa de clínica médica, que acho que foi muito, muito bonito e muito valioso, né? Porque hoje nossa faculdade conta com essa área de concentração em ensino na saúde, que é uma área que no mundo inteiro, né, se apresenta como uma área, enfim, que cada dia, enfim, se mostra mais relevante, né? Porque veja só, mesmo as questões mais urgentes que a gente teve que enfrentar agora recentemente pela Covid e tudo mais, todas elas vão o tempo inteiro colocando em xeque nossas estratégias formativas, né? Estratégias formativas cada vez precisam ser mais colaborativas, cada vez precisam mais ser multiprofissionais, interdisciplinares. Então, eu acho que, assim, queria muito agradecer a lembrança, mas, sobretudo, eu também homenagear, assim, as pessoas que desde sempre se envolveram com isso. Acho que assim, o Gontijo, a Angélica, né, a Eliana, a Silvia, que estiveram o tempo inteiro batalhando para isso acontecer, e acho que hoje é um patrimônio, né, 10 anos depois, é um patrimônio da nossa faculdade e que todos temos que estar muito orgulhosos dessa linha de concentração. Parabéns, pessoal, pelo trabalho.
Obrigado, professora Rosana. A senhora é uma incentivadora aí de novos programas, novas áreas na pós-graduação, e eu agradeço muito a sua participação nesse evento. Bom, o professor Gontijo é outro homenageado, ele é diretor da faculdade por ocasião dessa criação, e eu agradeço a presença dele. Eu passo a palavra para suas manifestações. Professor Gontijo, por favor.
Obrigado, professor Coy. É um prazer estar aqui. Eu agradeço o convite para estar nessa abertura. Entendo que foi um programa ou uma área de concentração muito importante, extremamente carente no Brasil, e já está com mais de 30 mestres ou doutores formados, ou seja, mostrou a resolução e a capacidade dessa área de formar pessoas em aspectos que envolvem o ensino em saúde. Então, foi profícua e importante essa iniciativa, que partiu efetivamente de uma iniciativa do Ministério da Saúde, com o edital de Pró-Ensino, ou seja, na época a CAPES incorporou isso, como a CAPES tinha, né? Acabou a CAPES, eu acho, ou seja, tinha uma capacidade de 70 anos de promover cursos de pós-graduação no Brasil. Ela encampou essa ideia do Ministério da Saúde, e com recursos inicialmente, que depois esses recursos findaram e a própria pós-graduação manteve essa ideia, persistiu nessa ideia tão importante. Ela teve como base, principalmente, a deficiência, vamos dizer assim, de pessoal qualificado nas universidades públicas, ou seja, na época, a universidade pública, e isso persiste, as universidades federais tinham menos de 60% do seu corpo docente com doutorado. Os centros universitários, menos de 30%, e as universidades e as faculdades isoladas, menos de 20% de pessoal com título de doutorado, ou seja, não tinha pessoal qualificado para implementar estudo sobre qualquer área da formação do ensino em saúde, né? Do ensino em saúde. Associado a isso, houve uma grande implementação do número de cursos de medicina. E todos eles, ou a grande maioria deles, em torno de 75%, com nota inferior a 3, ou seja, com qualidade muito baixa, seja por o ambiente inadequado de formação, seja porque os docentes eram não qualificados para essa atividade. Então, eu acho que a Faculdade de Ciências Médicas fez uma proposta muito interessante, profícua, que permitiu essa formação, e espero que continue. O ano passado, ou retrasado, esses 2 anos passaram tão rapidamente que eu não sei se foi o ano passado ou retrasado, houve uma proposta que eu acho que deve ser a Eliana, infelizmente, não está aqui, mas que deve ser incorporada às metas da faculdade, da criação de um programa específico de pós-graduação em ensino. E pela déficit de massa crítica no Brasil, a ideia era, inclusive, credenciar professores estrangeiros. E isso é possível. Ou seja, tinham professores tanto da Holanda quanto de Portugal, de Braga mesmo, certamente estará aqui com vocês, disponíveis ou que poderiam participar desse curso, um curso efetivamente internacional, para a formação e ensino. Então, eu acho que é um passo seguinte, o próximo passo seria essa possibilidade de submeter um programa de pós-graduação em ensino em saúde, que seria muito interessante para a faculdade e para o Brasil. Muito obrigado pelo convite, tá certo? Foi um prazer estar aqui, viu? Um abraço a todos.
Muito obrigado, professor Gontijo, também é um incentivador aqui dos programas de pós-graduação aqui na faculdade. Eu agradeço muito a sua participação nesse programa. Eu passo a palavra, então, agora ao professor Dr. Ricardo de Lima Zomer, que é o chefe do Departamento de Clínica Médica, que, por ocasião, acolheu essa área de concentração no programa de pós-graduação da Clínica Médica. Professor Zomer, o senhor tem a palavra.
Professor Zoner, o microfone.
Você está sem som.
Desculpe, alta tecnologia. Então, cumprimento novamente o professor Coy, a toda essa banca de abertura. Para mim é uma satisfação muito grande estar presente aqui. Cada um de nós tem um pouco da história de como as coisas ocorreram, como aconteceu. E eu me lembro muito bem, como o professor Gontijo comentou, era uma situação, na época do diretor da faculdade, muito carente essa possibilidade de formação de professores na área de ensino em saúde, né? Isso gerou também uma discussão ampla que culminou com a vinda do professor Gontijo deve lembrar bem, José Roberto Lacke Silva, que na época era coordenador da Medicina 1, esteve presente conosco numa discussão geral e na época para aonde nós iríamos nuclear essa área de concentração. E eu fiquei muito satisfeito que as nossas justificativas foram contempladas. Então, o programa em clínica médica recebeu a área de concentração, foi nucleada, a professora Angélica, a professora Eliana Amaral, a doutora Silvia, foi muito importante nisso para a construção dessa área de concentração nucleada inicialmente pelo programa de clínica médica. Então, eu fico muito satisfeito, é uma área que precisa hoje, inclusive, nós estamos revendo o currículo, a progressão na carreira docente e a carreira acadêmica na área de produção e ensino está sendo valorizada. E é fundamental isso que ocorra, né? Extremamente importante. A única coisa que, na minha satisfação, que poderia ser dobrada se não fosse mais área de concentração dentro de um programa de clínica médica. Então, eu falei várias vezes, em algumas reuniões no passado, que o nosso desejo era que houvesse a estruturação para que o programa de ensino em saúde realmente ligasse e que fosse uma realidade para alçar, né, seus próprios voos. Então, é essa a mensagem que eu deixo, ainda o meu desejo, e é claro que já há um tempo não estou mais lá atuando, né, administrativamente na pós-graduação, mas é um desejo que eu mantenho, que a área de concentração se torne um programa, se torne realmente um programa independente. Então, muito obrigado pelo convite, é uma satisfação muito grande estar presente, compartilhando um pouco da história de como foram esses últimos 10 anos. Então, eu agradeço e volto a palavra, então, ao professor Coy. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado aí, professor Zomer. O professor Gilberto Júnior, que também, por ocasião da criação, era o diretor associado junto da gestão do professor Contígio. Ele pediu para agradecer a homenagem, ele justificou a ausência. E eu passo a palavra à doutora Silvia Maria Picetto Ronquim-Passeri, que é coordenadora de apoio acadêmico da FCM, é uma figura, uma pessoa muito importante aqui nas atividades relacionadas à graduação aqui na faculdade, e que foi também uma das pessoas importantes na implantação do programa Pró-Ensino em Saúde. Por favor, professora Silvia.
Obrigada, professor Coy. Bom dia a todos. Agradeço pela homenagem e eu quero dizer que eu me sinto assim muito feliz, não só pela conquista e sucesso desse curso, mas por compartilhar a criação desse curso com professores tão brilhantes. Realmente é um prazer. Estendo também essa homenagem a tantos outros professores da FCM que contribuíram na escrita desse projeto, né? Na época, todas as sugestões foram consideradas e o resultado, com certeza, é uma conquista de muitos, né? De muitos professores aqui da FCM. Vocês conseguem imaginar a minha alegria como educadora em estar hoje nessa comemoração de 10 anos de um curso de pós-graduação em ensino na área da saúde? É sensacional, realmente. A minha alegria já teve início há 10 anos atrás, quando eu vi que professores médicos estavam empenhados em criar um curso na área da saúde. Então, assim, sem palavras para expressar realmente a minha felicidade com isso. Com certeza, a área da saúde, especialmente a medicina, é a que mais investe em ensino, além de suas atribuições ligadas à profissão. E aqui na Unicamp não podia ser diferente, né? Eu acho que esse é o resultado do envolvimento dos professores médicos e da preocupação deles com o ensino mesmo. Então, muito obrigada pela contribuição de todos aqui. Agradeço também aos alunos pela dedicação, né? A dedicação dos alunos é fundamental no sucesso desse curso. Então, eu gostaria de dizer que eu estou realmente muito feliz e realizada profissionalmente de estar vendo essa comemoração hoje. Muito obrigada. Volto a palavra ao professor Coy.
Obrigada, doutora Silvia. Eu também parabenizo todos os homenageados, né? Foi falado aqui mais uma vez que foi a partir de um edital do Ministério da Saúde que deu origem a esse programa. Mas, assim, se não fossem essas pessoas, né, que são homenageadas hoje, que levassem isso para frente, isso não teria ocorrido aqui na Unicamp, né? As pessoas, elas puderem entender a importância de um programa como esse aqui para nós, um programa que é estratégico e que qualifica o nosso curso aqui de medicina, mas ele ocorreu porque essas pessoas se envolveram, se dedicaram a isso, se dedicaram um tempo necessário para isso e mais importante que isso, não só a implantação, mas garantiram assim que ocorresse uma perenidade desse curso aqui, um curso que fortalecido dentro do nosso programa de pós-graduação, e que combinou aí com esse seminário organizado aqui pela professora Eliana Amaral, que nós esperamos que ela, em breve, ela consiga estar aqui presente para participar do mesmo. Tá bom? Então, eu agradeço muito a todos vocês, eu agradeço a professora Eliana pela lembrança do nome de todos vocês e para fazer essa homenagem mais do que justa e muito merecida também. Muito obrigado. Bom, dando continuidade à programação, né? Então, nós vamos começar agora, iniciando a mesa internacional, intitulada Possibilidades e Desafios para a Pesquisa e Ensino em Saúde. Serão feitas as apresentações em sequência, né? E depois será aberta para a discussão, né? A discussão será pelo chat do YouTube, do canal da FCM. Então, enviem suas perguntas por esse canal, tá certo? Eu gostaria de agradecer a todos os participantes dessa essa sessão, a disponibilidade de todos de estarem aqui presentes, a contribuição, são pessoas importantes em educação, que estão aqui, que vão transmitir a sua experiência e compartilhar a sua experiência em educação com os participantes desse seminário. E a primeira pessoa que eu convido é a professora Brown Anderson, da Universidade do Minho, de Portugal. Professora Brown, a senhora tem a palavra, por favor.
Obrigada. Eu não falo português, com licença.
Não, fique à vontade, professora.
So I will speak in English, but I will say parabéns for this event and for the 10 years that you have spent developing this important program. I will be speaking to you at Eliana's request about publishing and writing in English language journals. So I'm going to share my screen and hope this works. Good. Okay. So I have titled this Telling Your Story, because I think it is very important to think of the work that you are doing as part of a conversation. You are telling a story about your work. And it is critically important that you are able to get the reader to understand what your work is about, and equally important that you get the editor of the journal to understand, because the editor is the first point that will see your paper, and if they don't understand it, if this is not of interest, then your paper will not even be sent out for review. Now, when you're conducting a literature review, which is where many people begin, you are focused on identifying all the work that has gone before in this area. And what we find is that authors focus on what is known, when what is very important is to illustrate what is not known, how the work that you are doing is contributing to what is not known in this area. So you identify work that relates to your study to say, this is what has been done, and I am now adding this component that no one has talked about before. Again, part of this larger conversation. One of the most critical things to think about is, why did I do this research? Sometimes we do what we call research of convenience. Oh, I have a lot of data from my students. Maybe I can do a study of something. It's very important to think at the beginning, what is the question that you are trying to answer? Why are you doing this work? How is it contributing to this larger conversation? What is the question that no one has asked yet? Another important thing to think about when you are submitting your work, or even as you are writing your study, is what journal would this be best in? So it's important to know the audience of the journal. And I show you this slide because there has been a tremendous increase in the number of journals that publish medical education research, faculty development research. But these journals are not all the same, and this list is only a partial list. I'm sure that Madalena and Melchor, who will be speaking as well, have additional journals that they might add to this list. But it's important that you know the audience that reads this particular journal that you want to submit to, and that you're following all of the guidelines of that journal. Again, you want the editor of the journal to pay attention to your study and to say, oh, I think this would be useful for my readers. Now, I am the editor of a section of the journal Medical Education, that is called Really Good Stuff. And it is published twice a year in November and in May. And Really Good Stuff is not research, but the idea for Really Good Stuff is that descriptions of work that you are doing might lead then to conducting a full research study. And Really Good Stuff is challenging because you have to write in 500 words what your story is. You have to be able to tell in a very concise way, similar to when you are writing an abstract for a research study. You have to be able to tell your story in 500 words. And it's in English. And I can't stress enough how important it is before you submit your work to have someone who speaks English, who writes English, review your work. I receive so many wonderful ideas, but they simply are not written in a way that I can use them. There is not time to edit them. There is not time to send them back to the authors for revisions, because there's a very tight time frame for the publication of Really Good Stuff. So be certain that your English is understandable and tells your story. Another key point is the last one on this slide, that the context of the work that you are presenting is critical. Again, I see many great ideas, something like problem-based learning. Many schools around the world use problem-based learning. But if you are using it in a context that is resource challenged, that the faculty object to any change, whatever barrier you have overcome, that can make this a useful piece for Really Good Stuff. So think about the context and why what you are doing is important and why readers are going to want to understand it. There are 3 sections to the Really Good Stuff paper. Again, it's not research, so we're not looking for data, but we're looking for what the problem was that you were solving. How is this, again, part of this larger conversation? What did you do to address this problem? What did you do to begin to find an answer to the problem? And most importantly, what lessons did you learn in conducting this work? Because the lessons learned are the piece that I want to share with the readers. If a reader can see something that is a problem similar to what they had, oh, look, this school did this. I will try this. So it's very important. And another thing to think about is something that did not work. Often we think we have to publish only things that worked. There is tremendous value and a lot of lessons that can be learned from what did not work. So think about I don't want to call them mistakes, but unanticipated outcomes that you might share with other people. Now, I show you this slide because again, it's important to think about the competition. You could have the best study, the most interesting outcomes, and you're competing with all of these other people who are submitting to this journal. I get on average 160 submissions every time for really good stuff. And I only have space in the journal for about 35 of those submissions. So this is why it's so important to pay attention to the points I'm making, because there's tremendous competition in the publications. So the key points are to write in English, good English, to tell a compelling story. Why is the editor or the reader going to want to read about your work? What are the lessons that were learned? And it's important in the context that you're writing it in. It is an honor to have had the time with you. Obrigada. And I look forward to our further conversation. Obrigada.
Obrigada, professora Brownell, pela sua apresentação muito importante, trazendo recomendações valiosas para publicações. Eu agradeço aí a sua disponibilidade de estar aqui presente conosco hoje. Muito obrigado. Dando prosseguimento às aulas dessa manhã, convido a professora Madalena Patrício, da Universidade de Lisboa de Portugal, para a sua apresentação. Professora Madalena, muito obrigado por estar aqui conosco nessa manhã.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigada. É um prazer imenso. Só um momento para partilhar a minha apresentação. Podem ver a apresentação?
Sim, sim.
Sim? Então, só um momento. Para eu marcar aqui o tempo. Good morning to everyone. I was asked to talk in English because there are some members of this table that are English native language, so I'm doing this, so sorry for this. And I would like to start by congratulations the Reitoria of the Universidade de Campinas for the 10th anniversary of Pró-Ensino in Saúde, and also the NAPS. And here I bring you the picture of the team, and it's a wonderful team that I really wish to congratulate, namely Eliana, a professor I admire and who is a great friend, and I miss her in this morning. The title of the round is Possibilities and Challenge for Research in Health Education. What a challenging title. And I was asked to give you the Bimi collaboration perspective, that it's the best evidence medical education perspective. And I structure my little presentation because I only have 15 minutes in 5 parts. What is Bimi collaboration to start? Is it trustable? Why systematic matters in all Bimi reviews? How is Bimi impacting on research? How can Bimi and Amy support you as a future researcher or a current researcher? And final message. Let's move to point 1. to make all of us in agreement. I'm sure you all know, but just for those who are not so close to Bimi, what is the Bimi collaboration? It's an international group of individual universities, professional organizations committed to the development of evidence-informed education in the medical and health professions. To make it simple, I would say that Bimi is doing for medical education what Cochrane is doing for medicine. This Bimi was created by Harden and Hall in 1999. The question is if we can trust Bimi as much as we trust the Cochrane for medicine. The question is really if the nature of Bimi evidence is similar to the nature of Cochrane evidence. And to answer this question, myself with a colleague, António Vaz Carneiro, that many of you probably know or have met, we have done a study in the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Lisbon, systematic reviews of evidence in medical education and clinic medicine. Is the nature of evidence similar? So the research question was, which are the major differences and similarities between Cochrane and the Bimi systematic review? The major difference concerned the fact that the research questions are much more complex in Bimi reviews due to the confounding variables, namely the charisma, the enthusiasm, the motivation of the teachers, and so on. This doesn't happen in Cochrane. An aspirin is always an aspirin. In Bimi, there are no standard guidelines for all studies. And in Cochrane, a statement can be made in Bimi, can be made at the end of the review, while in Bimi, it may just be a general recommendation, not allowing generalizability. The major similarities concern the methods, asking a relevant question, searching selection the primary studies, critical coding and evaluation of primary studies, synthesizing the evidence, and finally, the most important and crucial step, providing implications for practice. So these are the similarities. So you can read in detail the whole study, but yes, our conclusion was that we can trust Bimi because the difference in between Bimi and Cochrane are perhaps more a matter of degree than the existence of fundamental difference. In both approaches, decision-making should always be supported by a hierarchy of evidence. But attention, because evidence alone is never sufficient for sound practice. Moving to point 2, every review the Bimi publish is a systematic review. So why systematic matters? And this was also published in 2019, what I'm going to say. So you can go to this paper to see in detail. I'm just saying some brief notes. I'm sure you are all are in agreement with me when I say the journal sections focusing on reviews. And this is common, we are always seeing this, but the use of the term systematic to describe these reviews is sporadic. And the problem is that are examples of systematic reviews that don't describe themselves as such. And the worst is that there are reviews that clearly are not systematic, yet describing themselves as such. So we have to do something. And the problem is also because some researchers clearly believe that certain types of reviews, namely the realist reviews, the narrative reviews, the scoping reviews, and other types of reviews are not compatible with the tradition of systematic review approach. And this is, for us, a mistake. And Bimi does not agree with this understanding. This is why systematic matters. And this is why systematic matters, as it matters for all research made in education or outside education. Let me give you 4 arguments for this. The first one relates to the definition of the Bimi review, because initially when it was created, Bimi was defined as a description and evaluation of evidence pertinent to a clear formulated topic question that uses explicit scientific methodologies to systematically identify, assemble, critical, analyze, and synthesize information relevant to the topic. So, according to the Bimi review, when it was created, it needs to be systematic. Argument 2, the compatibility of a systematic approach. I already talked on this. And systematic in the Bimi reviews is used to define a systematic approach to search, to select the primary studies. Second, a systematic critical coding and evaluation of primary studies. And third, a systematic synthesis of evidence. So, all Bimi reviews are systematic. Third argument, a move to a systematic approach. In 1999, the Bimi collaboration was found with the goal to disseminate evidence in the form of reviews to guide evidence-informed education. And as Harden said, the use of systematic approach is crucial, is the only that can work to move away past eminence-based works with their associated risk of biases. Finally, the fourth argument, when I start by talking about the fact if we could or not trust the Bimi reviews, is Bimi alignment with Cochrane methods. The term systematic in Bimis and in health education reviews clearly describes a search and extraction process that has its groundings in the positivist tradition similar to Cochrane, as I already said, but it's not in any way incompatible with the array of evidence synthesis in other types of reviews that can be used in the field. So, based in these 4 arguments, we can trust Bimi when systematic is understood this way, rather than being incompatible with review and synthesis in education. The term systematic denotes the form of methodologic quality that it's the same we should expect in primary studies. Moving to third little appointment. How is Bimi impacting in research? What is Bimi doing? Bimi is identifying the best evidence available to support evidence-based teaching. Bimi offers opportunity for training and development in relation to the implementation of evidence-informed teaching. Bimi is translating findings from research to teaching practice to support stakeholders to adopt an evidence-informed approach when they have to decide. And finally, Bimi is making accessible the best evidence available in some topics through the publication of Bimi guides, the Bimi systematic reviews. So far, we contributed to research and we published 64 systematic reviews, 64 guides, Bimi guides. And also we have under process 25 systematic reviews, so future guides, we hope. But if you ask me to say, what is Bimi giving to the research, what is our perspective? Bimi is giving answers to teachers' questions. The time is so short that I'm going to share just the first and the last Bimi reviews as an example of the answers we can have. So, this is the first Bimi guide although it's called number 4, because the 3 initial guides were just methodologic to teach people how to write a systematic review. So this was really the first Bimi systematic reviews with evidence, features and use of high-fidelity medical simulations that lead to effective learning, a Bimi systematic review, led by Barry Eisenberg, University of Miami. And the research question were, should I use simulation in my teaching? What 10 things can I do to make it more effective? I'm sure you agree. This review from 2005 is so pertinent for the time we are living now, after the pandemic, during and after the pandemic. The answer is yes, you should use simulation. And the 10 things are providing feedback, repetitive practice, curriculum integration, range of difficulty level, multiple strategies, capture clinical variation, controlled environment, individualized learning, defined outcomes, and assure the validity of the simulated. How important all these 10 things are. Now, the last Bimi guide, developments in medical education in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, a rapid Bimi systematic review. Led by Maurice Gordon, I was in the group as well as other people for Bimi executive and editorial committees. And also, I mentioned the 64 because these 2 guides are aligned. One is the update of the others made 6 months later, an update on the title of the previous one, which was led by Michel Daniel, Maurice Gordon, Madalena, and again, a group of people from Bimi. The questions are, what changes have been deployed in medical education? What is the impact of these developments? What lessons to be applied in the future can be learned? And I'm sure this is, you agree with me that this is the $10 million question. I don't know if you have in TV a program named Joker. This was a good question because in the middle, the first one was published in August 2020, and the second one, the update on January 21. And these were the questions we have in the top of medical education agenda. The main developments relate to these areas, and you are seeing here. And the main developments were a rapid shift to synchronous and asynchronous remote learning, early development supported by alternatives to clinical practice, few articles of exceptional quality can be future guiding models. And I mentioned Bloom. I think go and see all the studies in those reviews. Gaps in the literature were unfortunately identified, and an update review was done, and it's why we have made the second update. Let's now moving about the fourth thing, not the fourth part immediate. Let me just tell you about impact, and let me take the 2019 year as an example because it was the year before COVID and it was the year when Bimi celebrates its 20th anniversary. 7 systematic reviews were published, 13 systematic reviews were under process in 19, and very good results in terms of number of citation. 3 Bimi guides were among the 4 papers with more citations in medical education journals, and they are these 3 systematic reviews, Bimi Guide 39, 40, and 37, one in the effects of interprofessional education, the other in faculty development initiatives, and the last one regarding the utility of multiple mini interviews. This is the impact. In the 4 papers with more citations, 3 were Bimi guides. Yes, Bimi is impacting in research by providing systematic reviews to support informed decisions on medical education. What can you expect from Amy and Bimi after I have said this? What authors can expect? Bimi peer review process is different from peer review in other journals because we are committed to support, to supervise the authors throughout the handling process. So you don't receive just a yes or no or do some changes. You are really supervised and supported. And we, the Bimi board, we are giving to the authors the Bimi checklist we use to analyze protocols and final manuscripts. So before the authors start their review, they have the Bimi checklist with all the details. What authors can expect from Amy? This is fantastic because after a topic and the protocol is accepted, Amy is committed to publish the review. When you write a paper, you never know if a journal would accept your work. But with Bimi, if you are able to do in a successful manner, if you do the achievement of all steps you have proposed in your protocol, your review is published. And this is something fantastic. Final message for today. Medical education can no longer stay globally static with difficulty to encompass the tremendous changes in healthcare practice. We need to align practice with findings from research. To be effective, the changes we are introducing must be based on evidence. But to be effective, evidence must be based in a systematic approach. And for this, Bimi can be the answer. Thanks very much. Madalena.
Professora Madalena, muito obrigada por sua excelente exposição, pelo seu entusiasmo com esse tema, e obviamente, nós vamos ter muito para discutir com a sua aula. Muito obrigado. É um prazer tê-la aqui conosco. Na sequência, eu vou convidar o professor Rakesh Patel, da Universidade de Nottingham, no Reino Unido, para a sua apresentação. Por favor, professor Rakesh.
Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I have to say it's an absolute privilege and a pleasure to speak today at your symposium and conference. I got the kind invitation from Dario Fernandez, and as I say, it's an absolute pleasure to be a part of that. I looked at the program and saw that I was following Madalena, and immediately I knew that was me finished, because no one can compete with that enthusiasm and energy. And I would agree with all those points that Madalena has made. In fact, the Bimi review that she cited from Barry Eisenberg's Bimi number 4, when I was doing my doctorate in medical education about 10 years ago, that paper still sticks with me, and I'm a course director on a master's program now, and we use that as core text. So definitely agree with what Madalena has just said now. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully I can do that now. And hopefully, brilliant, you can see it. So my name is Rakesh Patel. I'm a clinical associate professor in medical education at the University of Nottingham. My academic role, I am course director for our postgraduate certificate, postgraduate diploma, and full master's program in medical education. I also am academic program director for medical education research here. So these are doctors who are doing medical education research alongside their clinical training. So we have one at the moment in anesthetics, another in ophthalmology, but their research is in medical education research. And I'm also an honorary consultant nephrologist. So I look after a renal unit, dialysis unit, patients with transplants, and inpatient care at Nottingham University Hospitals NHS Trust. As you can imagine, my title was The Possibilities and Challenges of Research in Medical Education. When I think about all my roles, I think it's fair to say that a lot of the challenges include balancing all these roles. I think one of the hardest things to do is medical education research, not necessarily because it's difficult, but I think trying to balance up clinical roles, your role as an educator, and being a researcher is exceedingly difficult. So I'm going to start with my take-home messages, a bit like Madalena, and I'm going to talk through these across the course of the presentation. Clinicians are not the same as clinical teachers, and I'm going to be deliberately provocative here, and I'm going to talk through them. Teaching is not the same as medical education, which is not the same as medical education research. And if we are serious about medical education research, then I think we need to really think more about programs of work rather than just doing a project, and ways in which we can integrate ourselves into these programs of work. And I think if you're going to be successful in medical education research, as Brownwell Anderson said earlier, I think we need to demonstrate our research, the stories behind it, the outcomes from it, and the way in which they are benefit to either the staff, the workforce, or patients. So the first one, clinicians are not the same as clinical teachers. This is me in the hospital. This is working with my pharmacist. And in this context, my first responsibility is the patient in front of me. It's trying to find out the diagnosis. It's trying to make a management plan. It's trying to keep the patient safe, look after the staff. But number one priority is to the patient in front of me. If we look at this particular picture, here my responsibility is not just to the patient, but to the student, the doctor, whoever I'm teaching. And this is where the distinction is. Because if we look at this lovely paper that was published in the New England Journal, I think the quote in this first introduction says it all. Clinical teachers differ from clinicians in a fundamental way. They must simultaneously foster high quality patient care and assess the clinical skills and reasoning of learners in order to promote their progress towards independence in the clinical setting. Clinical teachers must diagnose both the patient's clinical problem and the learner's ability and skill. And I think it's that last bit that perhaps there is an opportunity here to demonstrate this distinction, because in order for clinicians to be able to demonstrate they can diagnose a learner's ability and skill, I think you need to have knowledge in medical education. You probably need to have knowledge in medical education research, and you definitely need to integrate the two alongside your clinical expertise. In medical education, for many, many years, if you were an expert in your clinical field, so me as a nephrologist, you were given this role of teacher. But I would argue if you're a teacher, you have to go through many, many years of training and development in order to teach. And we need to think about the reasons why the same should apply in medical education. So teaching is not the same as medical education, which is not the same as medical education research. Let's look at that. So this is me again teaching. There's direct observation of the learner. They've been given a specific task and activity. They are then getting observation of how they're performing and meeting their goals with little prompts and nudges and strategies to keep them on task. That's the purpose here. This is teaching. If we look at medical education, this is a picture taken from me delivering our master's program. So here I'm actually teaching the teachers about medical education. Everyone in this room has a background in healthcare professions, education, or science, but what they're really learning about is the discipline of medical education. Everything from teaching and learning and curriculum design, the educational environment, feedback, assessment, all these domains or roles of a teacher, but specifically they're coming with their professional backgrounds, but the main objective is to learn about medical education. So yes, I'm teaching them, but they're learning about medical education. And here in my research role, I'm actually embedded in practice. here's the junior doctor. The research study, which I'll talk about shortly, is actually looking at how they think through clinical problems, what they do, and what they then decide. And I'm right in situ. I'm taking data, I'm making observations. I'm almost a researcher in residence here, and that is all part of a specific methodology and through the lens of medical education research. So within a UK context, I think this was one of the most helpful things that the National Institute of Health Research published at one point. What is medical education research? The research field is broad and may draw upon the traditions of education, psychology, sociology, anthropology, economics, linguistics, as well as disciplines such as management and business. The outputs of its research may encompass both theoretical and practical advancements and used for the enhancements of students, practitioners, patients, or societies. I think that is one of the best definitions I've seen for the space within which I find myself. And if we draw that out, where I think there is huge opportunity, so we've talked about some of the challenges that clinicians face in engaging in medical education research. Well, some of the opportunities is to extend our team and our expertise. So I work very closely with Dario. Dario is a cognitive psychologist. I don't need to be an expert in cognitive psychology because Dario's an expert in cognitive psychology. Equally, we work together on asking the right questions with the right expertise, using both our disciplinary backgrounds. There's other research I'm doing looking at patient safety and human factors, and there I've got a sociologist and an ergonomist, as well as someone from business, again, to give me the disciplinary background into a specific medical education problem. And one of the challenges, and then also the possibilities, if we take this multi or transdisciplinary perspective, is to now find the questions that really need answering. And I'm not just talking about the pandemic or post-pandemic, the big questions within medical education. What is the medical student going to look like in 2030? What does the medical school look like in 2030? What does the future of medicine look like in an era of AI and genomics and precision medicine? These are big, big fundamental questions. And the more we can move away from maybe a unidisciplinary perspective where we come as medics or others on our own, and more to a transdisciplinary perspective where we take all of these perspectives and come up with new frameworks in order to address the challenges we face today, I think we're going to see more new knowledge created. And this isn't new. I think this was one of the first webinars and conferences I went to in medical education now over a decade ago. And I was very interested in technologies. And here again, Madalena's mentioned Ron Harder. This was a lovely quote. And if you look specifically, it says, the challenge for the future lies in a closer collaboration between medical teachers, psychologists, learning technologists, and educationalists. Never a truer word said in the context of technology. And as Madalena said, post-pandemic, where we find ourselves now, those institutions and those researchers who have this cross-collaboration went into the pandemic better and probably will emerge stronger, whereas those who went in without these collaborations and this infrastructure probably are finding it difficult to emerge from it. As I say, I got interested in cross-collaboration and taking insights from different disciplines. And this is some of my early research as a PhD student, where again, I was designing a virtual patient technology because I learned that actually maybe if I wanted to look at how students work through these, follow their eyes, look at what they're clicking on, why are they clicking on this, why aren't they noticing that, asking more deeper questions and collecting richer data, then I should work with others. And this is done in a usability lab in one of our UK universities that specialises in distance education. Innovations work, and this is my only claim to fame or knowing Madalena. If you look at the right-hand side of this picture, I hope Madalena remembers this event. This is where research and development, you can come up with innovations. And again, the future is the students that we have now asking the right questions and using technology to answer the bigger problems we are facing. And I think there needs to be more of this interdisciplinary research and development opportunities. And I hope, as I say, beyond Brazil, within the UK and more broader, we can start forming these networks that our clinical colleagues already have. They're already embedded. We wouldn't have the vaccines and the progress we have with the pandemic, but I think the future lies in to what extent can we get medical education adopting a more medical way of collaboration and networking around research. And finally, as I start drawing towards the end, if we're serious about medical education research, we should avoid just thinking about doing just a project and think about more larger programs of work. Why? Because I think clinicians and psychologists and experts, we are from disciplines that are inherently skeptical. Even I could sense Madalena was trying to convince us that we should be using more evidence-based ways of doing things. We should, but it's just there's a dearth of evidence for it. I am a nephrologist. Tablets keep my patients alive. So if you've got acute kidney injury, tablets cause kidney injury. If you've got chronic kidney disease, tablets prevent you from developing end-stage renal failure. Or if you've got a transplant, medicines keep your transplant alive, and a kidney is the gift of life. However, we know there are a huge amount of prescribing errors, and in particular, doctors, young doctors, are twice as likely to make medical prescribing errors than either experts or non-medical prescribers, so nurses who prescribe or pharmacists. Why is that? Why would that be? And all the research generally points to either ineffective education. So one of the things that we tried to do, some really good stuff, if I can quote my earlier colleague, was to try and say, well, let's get the best education, let's design the best way in which we can deliver education and transform and do it all differently and see if that makes an impact. You have to collect data, and this is something that we use, again, a clinical framework. We use audit to collect all the data. We collected data for 4 months. We wanted to see just naturally what was going on, how much errors were happening, and we collected over 20,000 prescriptions just to get a handle on what was happening even before we put the intervention in. Some of the challenges we face in education is that we just do the education and then we measure, but we assume if there's a correlation that either the education caused it and that was it. But one of the things I think traps we fall into is that we need to test that the education works before we move into the live setting in the real world to see if that education makes a difference. So we tested the performance of these doctors in simulation centers. We videoed everything, and then we collected baseline data. We then created another arm where we looked at embedding the intervention, where we did exactly the same. We checked that the education worked in the sim center, but we introduced the education multifaceted and then collected the data there. It was a huge program, and this is the other ways in which educators and clinicians can work. The education's got to fit what's happening in the hospital, but we transformed anything. We kept all the education going, but we used the best evidence in medical education to say, well, if you're going to give feedback, how should you give it? If you're going to use simulation, how should you give it? And then we designed all of that into the education program. We brought the clinicians with us, and we then measured. And that's the last thing I'm going to say is, obviously, to be successful in medical education research, we actually need to demonstrate our research and the outcomes from it, positive or negative, that is actually making a difference to either the workforce or patients. So this was published, again, not necessarily in one of the medical education journals, because it was more broadly. These were 3 studies across 3 hospitals to demonstrate transferability of that intervention, because, as Madalena says, there's too many variables, and how this education sits in this hospital or even in this department is different to how it's going to sit over there. And as we know, orthopedics is different from general surgery, which is different from nephrology, and therefore there are always variables. But you can see here, everyone who got the intervention, you can see that their confidence as well as their performance is better than the experienced group or otherwise. And part of research is about managing stakeholders and partners. We work with all partners, because if medical education research is going to inform or change practice, then you need to engage with people in practice, the stakeholders, industry, clinicians, organizations in order to scale up research and sustain it. And this is a huge journey. This is something that I don't think we describe so much. So we were fairly keen with this particular program of research that we shared with people how difficult these things are to get done in practice. You have to do a whole load of things, pretty much how you do a program of research in clinical medicine. We took exactly the same lens and approach and framework and wrote it up and disseminated it again, and to share people that this is hard, but if done properly, you can save money and you can improve workforce and patient outcomes, which I believe is the holy grail of medical education research. So in summary, my take-home message, again repeated: clinicians are not the same as clinical teachers. Teaching is not the same as medical education, which is not the same as medical education research. If we are serious about medical education research, then we should try to avoid of just thinking of doing just a project, but instead contribute and integrate ourselves onto established programs of work with others. And to be successful in medical education research, I think we do need to demonstrate our research or the outcomes from it is actually of benefit to the workforce or our patients. Thank you.
Obrigado, professor Rakesh. Eu tenho o prazer de comunicar que a professora Eliane está presente e, para a sorte de todos, eu vou passar a palavra a ela. Antes, eu gostaria de agradecê-la pela oportunidade, pela organização desse evento. Está sendo muito elogiada a participação de todos os palestrantes. O professor Eliana, eu só vou fazer uma breve resumo do que foi apresentado até agora. A professora Brown, como você sabe, falou os aspectos relevantes relacionados aos pontos mais importantes relacionados à publicação de artigos científicos em educação médica, uma apresentação muito interessante. A professora Madalena falou também sobre a importância da colaboração da Bimi como fonte de diretrizes para os educadores, assim como uma forma importante, uma ferramenta muito útil para desenvolvimento de metodologias aplicadas à educação médica. E agora a palestra do professor Rakesh, explicando exatamente que é um desafio, acho que para todas as escolas, mas assim, explicando claramente que ensinar não é exatamente a mesma coisa que ter uma linha de produção em educação médica, em uma linha de pesquisa e a importância de uma linha com continuidade, né? Diana, muito obrigado. Eu agradeço imensamente a oportunidade de estar aqui para a Faculdade de Ciências Médicas. É uma honra poder contar com um evento desse e organizado pela sua pessoa. Muito obrigado.
I'm talking English to make everybody understand better for the ones who speak English. Are you okay? The sound is okay? Because I'm in the middle of the hospital, okay? It's cold. So my apologies for being late. Koi may have told you that I am following someone from my family who just delivered, and it was a very long, explosive period. So I expected to be free before 9, but it never happened, and just it was born a few minutes ago. So, but everything is okay. It's very symptomatic, as I will say, of a good day. Well, first, thank you very much for being here. I'm not going to take lots of your moments, and I really feel sorry for not being in the beginning, opening this session, but I'm sure that the people who told a little bit about the story, how this program started, made a very clear image for you of our growth and where we still have to go. I just had a few minutes from Rakesh talk, And I think that this is the point that we have to move to be more professional in our program, and this session aimed to help us to understand as a community where we should go and where we should invest. So thank you very much. And now I think it's time for the last station of this panel, correct? So we may have Melchor Sanchez for UNAM, Mexico, who is a good friend as well. Everybody here is a good friend. Myself, I haven't been before with Patel, but of course, Madalena and Brownie, they are very good friends. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation. And Melchor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you turn off your microphone, Eliana? It's okay. So, good morning to you all. Greetings from Mexico City. In Mexico right now, it's 7:21 in the morning. So I've been here since 6 in the morning. So I will speak in English, like this Mexican version of English. I hope the translators are okay with that. So here we go. I changed the order of the presentation. I will start with the challenges, and then we'll move to the opportunities. We have to recognize that the real world is very different from the ideal world. In the ideal world, you have this perfect symmetric triangle of clinical practice, education, and research. But in the real world, at least in my country, clinical practice is like this huge hydra monster that devours everything. I mean, it just absorbs all your energy. Then research has a more or less physical and financial space. And education is always there. It's one of the main missions of the academic institutions. But in terms of resources and time and financial support, it's like the slide shows, a little bit small. So we have a huge challenge there. And as the panel has mentioned, clinical practice is not obviously the same as medical education research. So this is a list of some of the challenges. There are huge technical and methodological aspects because in medicine, as you all know, we are trained in a positivist paradigm, and we are very synchronized to the clinical research usual tradition. So we have everything that has to do with qualitative research or mixed methods research is like a foreign language to the majority of clinicians. We also have a lot of ethical aspects. I don't know if the institutional review boards in your country are like these bureaucratic organizations that it seems that their main mission in life is make your life miserable with all kinds of obstacles to approve education projects. And one of the issues is that most institutional review boards or ethics committees in developing countries have no clue about what medical education research is. So they usually, they see medical education research as not very, how should I say it, high quality research, as not on the same league as traditional clinical research. And we also have this challenge of the credit and recognition of the individuals and groups, the enormous challenge of getting support to hire or to collaborate with people from other disciplines. You just try to hire a sociologist or an anthropologist in a Mexican academic medical center, and it will be a very difficult task. That's not easy. And there's also a lot of politics. The politics, internal and external. In the internal politics of developing country hospitals, medical education is not very high on the priority. So usually the people that are designated to take charge of educational positions in Mexican hospitals are the friends of the dean or some political designation, but not very frequently because they have the academic credentials for that. And there's also the issue of financing, the local and global relevance. In my country, there is very little external funding for medical education research. And I assume that's the same in many countries, probably Brazil, although I am not sure. And our friend Jeff Norman said this several years ago, that there are times when I fear that our research community has taken a cue from the medieval monks in the practice of self-flagellation. I mean, we complain a lot. That's like part of the medical education culture, at least in my country. So things have changed, but still medical education research remains, is like the poor relation in a family. This is a paper in British Medical Journal from 14 years ago. As you can see, there is a predominance of observational studies, and there is a huge predominance of studies in the undergraduate medical curriculum. This has changed in the last decade and a half, but in many developing countries, as I will show you later, we still are struggling with this vision of medical education research as not on the same level of importance as traditional research. And as you all know, publication in the field of medical education has increased enormously in the last 50 years. And in the last decade and a half, it has increased not just in quantity, but also in quality. The thing is, if you use Medline, the PubMed platform, and use medical education as a mesh term, you have about 176,000 hits. This sounds like a lot, but it's actually very little because Medline has 33 million papers in the database. And if you combine medical education with Mexico, excluding New Mexico, because New Mexico is in the United States, you only get, let me see, it's 882 results. So I know that you may say this is not a valid comparison, but that's part of the reality of what developing countries live. For example, PubMed has these 33 million citations, of which only 0.53% are indexed with the medical education mesh term. And Mexico has published about 0.002% of this amount. And as you know, medical education is very local. Context is critical. And if you compare this with the COVID papers, I mean, in just 1 year and a half, there are more COVID papers in PubMed than the whole history of medical education papers. So, I mean, this is one of the harsh realities that we must face. There's also this huge geographical distribution gap of publications in the field of medical education. This is from almost a decade ago, but it hasn't changed a lot, as I have seen in the more recent papers. This study that analyzed the country of origin in the leading papers in academic medicine, the Academic Medicine Journal. As you can see, academic medicine is mostly directed to, it mostly publishes papers from US authors. And if you use medical education, the journal of the ASME organization, the UK is still the most frequent country of origin, and Australia, USA, Canada, Netherlands, South Africa, New Zealand, Sweden, etc. So we have this asymmetry in the world. This is a beautiful slide from the World Mapper site where they map the country's surface by the amount of something, in this case, scientific research, scientific publications. And as you can see on the slide, the United States, Canada, England are huge. Mexico almost disappears, and Brazil is there. I mean, it's not so as thin as Mexico. And as the quotation says on this slide, scientific research is as much the product of the society that makes it possible as of the individuals that create it. And I mean, I know that it's not easy to publish in the medical education world. This is the paper that was the result of my master's in health professions education project in the University of Illinois at Chicago 10 years ago. The teaching of evidence-based medicine medical students in Mexico. It was a randomized clinical trials, and it took me more than 3 years to do the study, write the thesis, and then to have the paper accepted in an index journal. So another important issue that I want to bring to the discussion is the influence of the impact factor. The impact factor is one of the, I mean, I know that it's an important thing, but it has been so distorted and badly used by academic organizations all over the world, but and it has a disproportionate value to its real impact, because it doesn't actually measure the impact of science on life, on daily life. The cartoon says that if your IF is about 10, then you enter here. If it's lower, then you go someplace else. I would just like to point out that not even the best 5 medical education journals in the world have an impact factor about 10. So that says a lot about the what the impact factor means in the medical education world. And I love this classification of the purpose of research in medical education by David Cook, who was my classmate in the master's program in Chicago, and Dr. George Bordage, who was my tutor. And they proposed this classification of the purpose of research in medical education. Descriptive studies are just descriptive, what was done. In their initial publication, it's about 16%. Justification is did it work, randomized trial, etc., more than 70%. And clarification, the papers that really advance the discipline, why or how did it work? We did a study that we presented at the IME meeting a few years ago about using this classification in research papers published in my country. So we found that the majority of the papers in our study were descriptive. That is, more than 70% of the Mexican studies related to medical education, they just said, I teach anatomy or physiology, so and so, I use this platform or whatever, just descriptive. And about 20% were of the justification area, and only a small percentage belonged to the clarification classification. So there are many things that we can do. This from a beautiful paper by Larry Gruppen about how to improve research in health professions education, which I mean, it's as valid today as it was when it was published 14 years ago. There's a need to increase the identity of the medical educators, scholars all over the world. We need to have the recognition, not just informal recognition, but also formal recognition in terms of support, incentives, etc. We need to use resources. There is no free lunch anywhere. So we need human resources, material resources, financial resources, and it involves having a medical education department or a HP department in the university or the medical schools. We need to do more collaborative research. We need methodological support, which is very difficult to obtain in developing countries. As I mentioned, it's very difficult to pay a position for a sociologist or an anthropologist in a Mexican large medical center. We need to do more in the terms of balancing incentives and rewards. I mean, if we use a more modern model of scholarship, like the Boyer model, where publication is not the only form of recognition, I mean, the discovery aspect of scholarship, and we use more formal assessment, valid assessment of our scholarly products, it will make the field of health professions education research in your area larger and of higher quality. I know that protected time is, it's a concept that basically does not exist in Mexico, but it's a very basic thing. If you do not have any protected time, it's very difficult to write, to publish, etc., to do quality research. You need connections among researchers. You need to develop research tracks, a line of research that is focused on some area with the with the required specialization. We need training in HP research. We need multi-institutional databases, which are very difficult to use in terms of the ethical and legal issues of each country. And we need to combine practice with scholarship. And as this same guide says, we need to develop departments of HP education that focuses not just on teaching and service provision. In Mexico, the service provision part of these areas it just absorbs most of your energy. You need to do research, and you have to nurture the careers of the personnel involved. This recent paper in Teaching and Learning Medicine puts the finger on the wound. In order to have compelling research in health professions education, it might be usefully advanced by considering what it would mean if the community framed itself as a knowledge-producing field instead of aligning itself with either disciplinary or practical interests, which is unfortunately very frequent. And we have to move to evidence-based education, more as Madalena said. We will never leave opinion-based education. It's in our DNA, but we need more evidence. We have to create things in our local language. I mean, there are more than 540 Spanish-speaking people in the world. There are more than 560 native Spanish-speaking people in the world. So we have to create material in Spanish in terms of, for example, Mexico. This is our book on medical education, theory and practice. And actually, this year, our journal, well, in January, our journal of Investigación en Educación Médica, Research in Medical Education in Mexico, we will have our 10th anniversary. So parabéns to your organization, Eliana. We almost have the same anniversary. So when you really understand something, you understand it better if it's written in your local native mother language. For example, this paper of the use of Webb Oski in our Faculty of Medicine. And we have to use all this material because more than 95% of the material is in English. I understand that English is the language of science, but as Rakesh said, most clinicians are not clinical educators, and most clinicians do not read research, and most clinicians do not publish. So this is our journal in the Mexican Journal of Medical Education Research. We have more than 160,000 users. And as you can see, the majority of countries that visit our journal are shown on the slide: Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, República Dominicana, Chile, etc. And we have more than 20,000 visits per month. And I'm just getting to the finish line of my presentation. You have to write, and you have to write, and you have to write again. It's very difficult to write, and it's much more difficult to write if English is not your native language. So we have to keep practicing. There is no way around that. And we have to recognize the clinical part of it, of our colleagues. Here is a young medical doctor. He says, and besides taking care of patients, they want me to teach, assess, do research, publish papers, take mindfulness courses, go to yoga classes, be happy, have a family, etc., etc. It's not easy. And we have to stop having this traditional vision of the world. The pandemic has taught us that the world is just one big global village. Global warming is here to stay, and we are very pessimistic about that. And we have to improve things with good quality medical education research. So the pandemic has taught us many things, and we have to continue improving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melchor. I hope now that people can understand better. And are you hearing well, Sylvia? Not really.
There's a lot of background noise, Elena.
Also,
Yeah, I think that the space I am is not good, so I have to change. Well, let's open for questions, and so I will find somewhere else to stay with less noise. Any question that we receive from the audience in YouTube or comments, Sylvia? Can you bring us the comments on YouTube, Sylvia?
no, just congratulations.
Okay, let's start warming up for questions. I'm sure that even the invited people here, they can have questions from one to each other, but I want to make some few comments after this Melchor presentation. What happened in Brazil certainly is very close to what happened in Mexico in terms of lack of support, financial support, and lack of tradition on recognizing medical education research as part of our career. So our med school has been working in the last 10 years also to value the scholarship of education, the research and education, because we know how important it is for an institution in Brazil well recognized as a research institution. And all the work that we have to do, the clinical work that is competing, is basically the same situation, Melchor. So my point here is to ask people why being collaborative is so difficult, because what we have to do is to work in collaboration. We don't have all the expertise here and there. We have to put things together, people together, and we are not commonly very collaborative in Latin America. So I want you to make comments about this. How does it work in West, in Europe, particularly in Portugal, how you see it in UK? I see that we are in the infants of the process. And how do you see yourself? Are you in the adulthood? Open the floor.
Eliana,
yes, Madalena, yes.
If you want, I can say, I think you touch a crucial point, because in fact, I would go far. Not only we are not collaborative, but in the more frequent cases, we are competitive. I remember how many times, less now, but some years ago, to propose in my faculty to do a presentation at IME together with another university in Lisbon, and my dean said, out of the question, you should publish about our university and not so. It's incredible. And it's so important that Professor Harden took collaboration of one of the major strengths for the future ahead. And I think it's the only way. Resources are scarcer. We have not all the experts in all fields. So if we don't start collaboration with others, I think we are lost, and in research even more. So completely supporting your idea of talking about collaboration and doing things in collaboration. And for sure, no more competitive in that way. Only good competition to achieve more, but not the way we usually have.
And Eliana, I would comment that many journals look for studies that have been done from more than one institution So the need to collaborate has been reinforced by some of the policies of journals. I think, as Melchor and a few other people commented, sometimes the institutional review board, the ability to share data is challenging, but it shouldn't be a reason not to try. And especially now with how skilled we have become with this sort of communication. We don't have to be in the same room with someone to collaborate. We can do it worldwide through Zoom and other mechanisms. So I would encourage people to think about collaboration and finding common research that could be done, because that's what journals are looking for now.
Good. Rakesh, any comment from your side?
I'm going to agree with everybody, aren't I, really? And it's all of those things and more. I think what motivates me, and it's something we need to think about, is succession planning and the future. I think if we're really serious about medical education, we should be thinking about 2030 now. I think we need to be thinking about the medical students of the sort of future. They're at school now, they're post-pandemic, they are digitally savvy. And I think not just digital, but genomics, I think medicine is going through a change. And I think medical education, if it's not going to be the poor relative of medicine, I think we need to up our game. So it's a macro level with the funders and the governments and the institutions and the leaders and the leadership, but also bottom up. I think, I love this example. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a really great collaborator in Brazil, a young investigator who has had some funding to develop some research, who's reached out and has made the link. And I think it's that. I think the collaborations that Brownwell and Madeleine have talked about, we are human. We are survival of other species because we learnt to collaborate. We learnt to socialize and develop language and all of that. And I think we just need to go back to basics, I think, and rediscover in a post-pandemic world that yes, things can be done on Teams, but there's nothing better than being at a conference, having a conversation about, oh, I went to your presentation, this looked interesting, and then the rest is history.
Melchor, any other comment?
Yes. Well, the thing is that this group, we are a biased population. We are not the typical sample of humanity. So in order to collaborate, you require trust. And that's something which in the current, as you can see in the pandemic, it's very difficult to trust. And now with the new variant of the virus, all this closing of borders, etc., I mean, it's very easy to say that we need to collaborate, but in the real world, when you have to get to the nitty-gritty details, for example, we did a collaborative project in innovational education for 9 Mexican universities, and it took us 4 years to have the lawyers of all the universities agree on the writing of the damn document of the thing, you see. So it takes a lot of effort. We work in the medical education area. We have this, we are good-natured people, we are nice people, we trust each other, but sometimes to get collaboration with people that you do not know, it's not so easy. It's like, a football team, that's something common with Brazil and Mexico. The football team, you have to read all other people's mind in order to have the whole be more efficient than the parts. And another difficult thing is that rewards and incentives are mostly focused on individuals. The Nobel Prize still goes to individuals. So the order of authors is still a very important thing for recognition systems. If you are the 7th author in a paper, it's not the same as being the corresponding author or the first author. So we still have these hierarchies of importance which can be a little bit in the way of collaboration, where we have all these implicit and explicit hierarchies. For example, in Mexico, there is the hierarchies of the professions. In Mexico, interprofessional education has not taken off because of this huge identity difference with physicians and nurses and other healthcare providers. Different salaries, different social recognition. So that makes it a difficult setting to collaborate. But on the other hand, we have to collaborate, as the global warming phenomena keeps telling us every single year. That's my comment.
We do have, yeah, yes, you can.
Eliana, I would also, I want to be a bit more positive than my friend Melchor here, and just point out that what we're celebrating, the 10-year program, is an example of the kind of thing that can lead to collaboration. And as Dr. Patel said, it's succession planning, it's showing the way for others coming along. So I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, and in this regard, I want to tell you a little bit of our reality at the med school at Unicamp. We have two initiatives that helped us in parallel with the program. They are more recent ones, but I think it are the steps that we can pave for future. One of them is having our research nucleus, as we call the NAPIS, taking care of revising the projects and giving suggestions for improvement before the IRB can review. Because we know that IRBs are not used to see this kind of projects, and they are not prepared. So they are really thankful for us to be in charge of revising projects and giving suggestions for improvement. So in a way, we are trying to develop more of the sense of research. Also, another recent initiative is our What Educators for Tomorrow program. They are students who have been taking responsibility with us in terms of developing other students in medical education, and they are being introduced to research themselves. Then we hope that they will be faculty and researchers in future, and people who started since very early ages. But now I think it's the time for us to set research programs that collaborate. And the pandemic gave us another possibility. We can work remote, what was not very useful in the beginning. So I see more chance for us to develop our faculty members, I mean, at Unicamp itself, but in other institutions that can collaborate together. So I think, Melchor, that we have a little bit more chance on working together because, of course, it was much more expensive in the past, and having money is not one of one of our strengths in terms of research. So yes, we have to do that. Well, there are some questions here that I want to pass to you to answer. Let's start from, we have congratulations again. And someone wants to know, what do you think are the future for after the pandemic? What changes with the pandemic? I think Rakesh started talking about directions, different directions in terms of research. So could you please, the group, elaborate a little bit more in terms of what the pandemic brought and the changes looking at the research in medical education? Who wants to start? Madalena?
Sorry, I had a break. Can you repeat? I didn't heard your question.
Oh, sorry. They are asking what comes after the pandemic in terms of research, what directions will come. And Rakesh started a little bit on this topic.
I'm glad to talk on this because I think, first of all, and it's not to make publicity of our Bimi guides, go and see what is on. I think at least two main, let's say, ideas and priorities came after the pandemic. The first of all is that the good things and the strengths in medical education were there before, were there during the pandemic, and must stay. Of course, the face-to-face teaching, learning and assessment was suppressed because we are obliged in almost all over the world, and we will hopefully be back to this. But there is also good things from the time of pandemic, because in the past, I think we all, or with very few exceptions, teachers were a little bit resistant to record our lectures. And I think that in terms of lectures, that I really believe the force, if we start recording the lectures and give the students or recording lectures or the materials and use the time of the lectures to discuss with them, to analyze clinical cases, to ask students to make presentations and another group to discuss. I think it's much more important and useful than spend 50, 60 minutes exposing one idea. So this is just an example, but I think that what comes out from pandemic is that we need to be much more exigent in everything we do. We need to look at excellence, because namely when it's webinars, if we gave a face-to-face lecture, not good, it probably something can stay. But if it's a webinar, it's impossible to exist. So let's take this for after the COVID. We need to be much more perfectionist. We need to invest. And there are ways to see how to do things good. Another thing comes to your first point. I think during the pandemic, even to record the lectures and everything, the teams in the different curricular areas came together, decide things together, make even the presentation, the best one with skills in communication, give a lecture and the others are contributing in another way. So we also were, let's say, much more supportive of teachers and not so isolated, and also a good relationship with the students, because at least in our university, and I think it's all over the world, sometimes it was the students that came to us saying, look, did you see this? This is good for the simulation of this and that or that, you know, but above all, exigence. We need to be very good, keep the good things, but also the good things from COVID. This is my point.
Eliana, I think that what the Madalena said is very true and illustrates the creativity that was catalyzed by the pandemic. In the journal Medical Education, we had a special section where we just invited people to submit descriptions of what they had done to address teaching and learning and assessment during the pandemic. And I thought we would get a few submissions. We had about 500 submissions, and this was done in a very short amount of time. It was creativity. And so again, to Madalena's point, if we can sustain the level of thinking differently, asking questions about what could be changed, learning from each other, again, collaboration, these are some very positive things that might be maintained once we determine what the new world looks like.
Good, Brownie.
I'm going to present a different perspective, and I've got a feeling Melchior might do as well. I think what the pandemic's done is a big wake-up call for everybody in medical education, because I think, if anything, maybe some of that complacency pre-pandemic about what we do and what our purpose is, I think the pandemic really, within an instant, really got medical educators, the teachers, actually, is it good enough for me to just do this? They were now having to care for their students in a way that no one has ever really talked about in terms of health and well-being and mental health. I think we were asking existential questions around what's a university without walls, because that's essentially what we were delivering. And I think the pandemic cruelly exposed some of the bits that we would never got right. I think the phrase I used, we didn't fix the roof when the sun was shining. Before the pandemic, digital was always seen as a nice add-on or a luxury or a barrier. The minute the pandemic struck, where it was a barrier, it was suddenly an enabler, and all the resistance to digital and technology suddenly evaporated. So I think as we come out, I think there's an opportunity to really learn these lessons and hopefully not make them again, because the next disruption, whatever it is, whatever the next black swan event, it's coming. And I think now, can we learn to invest where we need to invest, which is in our teachers, because that, at the end of the day, is what medical education is. The unit of intervention in medical education is the teacher, full stop. And then after that, to what extent do we make ourselves resilient and not forget or lose our moral compass and our responsibility to who we're here for and why we're paid to do what we do?
Thank you, Rakesh. Melchior, any more comments?
Yes. I do not want to be the pessimistic one in the group, the panel, but as I mentioned, I did the master's program online. So I lived the online education experience in 2003, when we didn't have video conferences, for 5 straight years. And I love online education. I'm completely convinced that it's an extraordinary modality. And one of the good things of the pandemic is that it put online education really on the main stage. The bad thing is that it wasn't, as the online education gurus like to say, it wasn't real online education. It was more of this emergency remote learning where everybody was just giving classes by Zoom, which is, of course, not a good online education experience. But on the other hand, it really increased it made, like they say, a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for everybody. And everybody had to use the technologies for teaching. I mean, this is a good thing. Even though there is a large digital gap all over the world in the terms of access to technology, to good computers, to internet connection and technological infrastructure, we are moving in the right direction to decrease the digital gap. And all the governments everywhere are focusing on increasing the availability of technology for everybody. And that's, I think, a good thing. We still have a long way to go in terms of faculty development. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of quality research of what the pandemic effects are, because as you said, there were a lot of descriptive studies of the response to the pandemic. But as you also know, there is this huge time gap between the creation of a study, the design of a study, the acquisition of financial support, etc., the implementation of the study, the analysis, and then the publication phase. So it takes a long time to have these paradigm-breaking papers that are starting to trickle in the stream of medical education publications. So I think that the best thing that will be the result of the pandemic because we're still in the pandemic. I hate the words post-pandemic because the pandemic seems to not have an end in sight. But the main thing is that the hybrid learning or blended learning will become mainstream. And that's a very important thing because there are several meta-analyses and systematic reviews that show without shadow of a doubt that blended learning or hybrid learning produces better learning outcomes than only face-to-face learning. And there are literally hundreds of studies that show that. So we have to use the best of both worlds, I see. That's my comment.
Thank you, Melchior. I totally, okay, Madalena has a comment. Just making a point here. I totally agree with the wake-up call, Rakesh. I was in another position during the change, when the pandemic came to Brazil, and I was in the position of being responsible for all the undergraduate programs at the university. So I leaded the group moving to remote, and it was clear the wake-up call. People started to think about their role as teachers, as faculty members in a different way. And there was an emphatic, how can I say, wave coming over the education, and it was a very nice experience. So I want to refer to that. Madalena has a comment, and then we have more questions.
The mic, Madalena.
Okay. It was not a question. It was more to share a concern that I have related to research. And I think here we can maybe discuss a little bit. Brownie already said and told us that a lot of descriptive studies are there and people are creative, and I have nothing against. But I think that all that are working with research, we need to make an effort, because so many times we read a paper, they basically describe a little bit, not so much. And then we arrive at the end, and the only thing we get is more research is needed, blah, 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 blah. And we are not even explaining what was done in the intervention. I always use a comparison. For instance, if it was in Cochrane and if I was implementing a study to identify the effects of aspirin in a certain group of patients and so on, with a control and so on, everyone knows what the aspirin is and the composition and so on, and all the description of the therapeutic is given. When we have an educational paper, we very rarely show what is really the intervention. It's not enough for me to say that a video was making after a lecture or without a video, because a video could make the difference or not. If you don't tell the people what was in the video, what was your concerns and so on, if you are not giving us what is the aspirin in education, we are lost and we don't progress, because we start a paper or a review or even a primary study, and we start by the introduction with a problem, then the questions, then the methods, then the results, discussion and conclusions. But really, we need to go back to the beginning and say something about the initial research questions. Even if it say that no, it was not proven, we can open a window or close a door, but it's not what we are having. And I think all of us, we need to fight for this. We have not a description what was the essential of the interventions, and we came to the end completely away from the initial questions. Sorry. And I'm not pessimistic, I just share this.
Yeah. I think you are talking about quality research anyway. So you have to describe the intervention in details for people to reproduce if needed. So it's just a basic aspect of research. Brownie may have some comment, and then I move to another question.
I just want to add to what Madalena said. I mentioned it at the beginning of my talk. the importance of adding to the conversation. We have so many studies that are single, we did this in our school, and there's no follow-up. We don't build on medical education research that has gone before. And I think that's an area for collaboration, but something that we really need to think about when we think about a study. What does this add to what has gone before?
Fantastic.
Yeah. Again and again, I think the basic questions that we have for all research projects and research reports, they do apply in education. And we use in our areas of work, in the other areas of expertise. And when it comes to medical education or health professions education, suddenly we forget it. So again and again, yes, we have to improve quality. And remembering the 10 years anniversary is not only for Unicamp, many programs in Brazil started that time because it was a big project, and it's time to renew all this energy. And this event, according to the comments, will contribute to that. So thank you. Well, one more question that I think is very important is from Silvia Batista, and she's asking the group about interprofessional research related to interprofessional educational, so interprofessional education research. So what can you say about this? How is this area moving? What are the difficulties and etc.? So comments about interprofessional education research.
I don't mind going first on that one. So I think interprofessional education is slightly obviously different from interprofessional education research, but we've got lots of small things, and it just seems to me that we haven't embraced interprofessional education for many reasons. And I think a lot of those are related to professional identity and a lot of the cultural issues we have within healthcare. So unless you understand that cultural anthropology of the way in which doctors are, nurses are, and other healthcare professionals are, it's very difficult to start unpicking where we are with interprofessional education. And I think this is a personal viewpoint only, rather than of anyone else. I've always felt that interprofessional education has been driven to try and get doctors to realize, and I say this as a doctor myself, that hang on a minute, there are other members of this team and they are providing equally, if not more, input. And certainly as a renal physician, if you put me next to a dialysis machine, I have little or no understanding sometimes. I need my dialysis nurse. So certain specialties may have different relationships interpersonal as to how that works. I think going forward into the future, I think there's some generational differences. I think there's a lot more social justice in the generation coming forward. There's a lot more mutual respect between different backgrounds and professional individuals just generally. And I would hope interprofessional education and interprofessional educational research starts looking at what has happened in other sectors, business, sport, and looks at team science. So team science is changing the way we are doing research in medicine, the way in which we are structuring our care pathways and networks within healthcare. And I would love to see a more team science-based approach, not just in interprofessional education, but interprofessional education research.
Madalena?
Yes, I think what Rakesh said is completely true. And I also believe that it's difficult, and we are not probably having the research we want in interprofessional education, because I think, and I don't want to be critical on this, that many times we are saying that we are making interprofessional education, and this is just putting together medical doctors with nurses and so on. And I think this is nothing. They can be together in the same class, and maybe it's even worse if they are in different places and so on. And I just mentioned as an example, but I think we need to rethink the interprofessional education. That, for instance, in first year, we started to put at our university the students from first, at the end of the first year, before they go to holidays in June, they go 1 month to the wards where they need to do everything with the nurses, and they are rated, they are evaluated at the end of this stage of 3 weeks or a month, I don't know, by the nurses. So the nurses have the power of assessment, and they need to be also, when they talk with the families and see the routines and understand the drama on the lives of the patient and so on. And these kind of things, I think, can change the stereotypes and the way the doctors see the nurses and the nurses see the therapeutics and so on. So I think this is an area of reflection, and we really need a pandemic situation to change this, you know. And it's true, I think, and until we find the models to really help students to understand the benefit of working with everyone and so on, it's very difficult to have research and to have good practice of education.
Yes, yes. The thing is that 20 years ago, when I did the master's program in Chicago, we had a one-semester course about current issues in health professionals education. And I remembered that the subject was interprofessional education. So here we are, 20 years later, and last month we had the Mexican Association of Faculties of Medicine meeting, and there was all this talk about how to really embrace interprofessional education in the Mexican universities. And they had several international speakers. But when they asked the deans to raise their hand if they had interprofessional education formally in their schools, 0. Not a single one of them had interprofessional education. And they just said, well, we're just waiting to see what happens. I mean, it's very easy to say, but to change the regulations of the medical school, to go against all these hidden curriculum of the hierarchies of the professions in Mexico is not easy. So most people tend to say, well, it's nice. We have to get the students together for some activities in the simulators, etc. But to really develop a shared mental model of interprofessional education where everybody looks at the same level and doesn't look like, for example, physicians look down on nurses or something like that, it's very difficult to develop the core group of people that really have to work to develop, to advance interprofessional education in our country. No? So I mean, I just mentioned that because 20 years ago, it seemed like a very good idea. There's a lot of research about it, and it seems that it's a good thing for patients, for clinical outcomes. But on the political, psychological, sociological, and normative and legal issues in local universities is not, they are not easy barriers, you see.
Melchor, in Brazil also the regulation makes it very difficult. So we have to be, again, creative to put people together to work since the beginning and think about health as a team, regardless of the law, the regulations, because if we wait for the regulations, we are never doing, and I agree, it's an issue. Well, we are reaching the time, but there is a question here that I think it's important to direct to the group. It's directed to Melchor initially, but I will put in open for everybody, please. What would be the comment about the impact of digital health at UNAM? In this case, they are asking about UNAM undergraduate medical program. So digital health or remote medical consultations and things like that. How do you see it? in Mexico, and maybe the others can comment as well.
Well, actually, in our current curriculum that was developed in 2010, 10 years ago, we included the course of biomedical informatics, which included the subjects of telemedicine and the use of digital technology for teaching and all these kind of things. So I remember 10 years ago, they said, what physicians do not need this, I mean, what computers for medicine. And now that telemedicine has really taken off and telehealth is becoming a mainstream activity, we think that the curriculum needs to be updated again, but it needs to include all the digital health current concepts and add the competencies, the digital competencies and digital literacies for students and teachers and practicing physicians, and also for patients to have this a more balanced system that takes advantage of the digital health tools. So right now I am the president of the university is a physician, an ophthalmologist at UNAM. And he designated me a couple of years ago. I am in charge of distance education, but for the whole university. And it has been a challenge because, I mean, there are many disciplines that love online learning, but there are many disciplines that hate online learning. So I think that we have to develop this balance that has been pushed by the pandemic to use the internet and everything on technological as part of the landscape, not as a different thing, because one of the ugly things about the concept, the bias towards online learning, is that it's like a dichotomy, online learning versus face-to-face learning. We have in the 21st century to take advantage of the fact that learning is a single thing. It's a complex multidimensional construct that includes the use of technology. So I think that digital health is here to stay, and the use of hybrid teaching and learning is also here to stay. We just have to keep getting better at it and do research about it.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that's very important, that we have to update our curriculum. And it happens the same here for us at the medical school. We are now thinking about the new curriculum, and as you said, digital literacy and competencies are totally, it's impossible to forget that they may be official part of the curriculum. So I suppose that Rakesh may have some similar experience and others in other countries moving to this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd completely echo the point about this false dichotomy between online and offline. I think, I think the pandemic hopefully has put that to bed, that we are learning in a digital world, and we should just really start with that, because I think those of us who have been involved in technology enhanced education have always felt that actually there shouldn't be this dichotomy, but there is, and its origins come from distance learning programs where if you couldn't get to campus, you could have this other thing that was called distance learning that was somehow less than being in front of the expert in front of you. So I agree. I think we need to move away from that. The question was about digital health, and I think it's absolutely paramount that we focus on that. I think the smartphone changed everything in 2011, and I think actually that was when the digital health started. I have this lovely picture where I walked onto the transplant ward, and my patients who were in hospital all had laptops up and dongles. And I was like, what on earth's going on? It was like a library, but it was full of patients with laptops. And I asked them, well, what are you doing? And actually they were seeking information from the internet because the quality of the explanations from the medical staff was so poor that they had to go and teach themselves about the health, because actually they got more information on the internet. And then the second thing was, another reason why they had their laptops is because there was a whole online community of people with similar diseases, and actually they were seeking support and advice and guidance because they weren't getting that in the hospitals. So I think this sense that digital health is here to stay, actually it was here 10 years ago, what we need to do looking forward is actually think about all the other things that we've learned from the pandemic about misinformation, and actually reclaiming some of that space in the digital space where what's worked, e-consultation, which bits has it worked, smartphone devices and access to information when you don't know the knowledge, that works. We should do more of that, empowering patients to take hold of their data, and then thinking if healthcare's there, what on earth do we need to do as in our curriculum as teachers to say that's the world they're going in? And the way I think about it is, unfortunately, we have this sense where we're looking forward to make strategy by looking in the rearview mirror. I think we need to actually look forward and see the world that's all around us, and then build the curricula and the faculty development programs of the future.
Well, okay, I think we are reaching the time, so I will leave this last minutes for our Vice Dean to say any words or questions he may also have. Say that we have to continue discussing how to accelerate the process of, let's say, professionalizing research in education for health professions, because in this side of the world, we have few opportunities to train people. So it's important that we share among the Brazilians, but as well as work together with people from other continents, other countries, and learn from the ones who are more experienced. So my thank you. All the people they are happy with they have listened here, and they are asking for references. So if you can share the references, we are really putting available for people, for Brownie or Madalena or Rakesh, and Melchor already started. I know Melchor very well, how fast he is in terms of providing references. So thank you very much. They are on YouTube now, Melchor. So, Boy.
Thank you, Eliana. I would like to congratulate all the participants. It's a great privilege to have the speakers here. And I think that for us here at Unicamp, we have this kind of symposium. It's very important because it can increase the interest in medical education. I think that we have a lot of professors here that can develop studies in medical education, and it's a great opportunity to listen to your experience and to your it's a great privilege to listen to all of you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for all of you, and I hope we can be together again another time discussing these issues. And when you have opportunities for collaboration or opportunities for training, please let us know, and we are going to spread out around Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Can we say thank you? I think we all should sing happy birthday for this program.
Yes. Happy birthday.
And see all the faces. So many people keep just the names. It would be great to see your faces. So congratulations to the Pró-Ensino, and
thank you,
happy birthday.